much. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and dear friends, very warm welcome back to session 2 of our inaugural Sinology Art of Living seminars by the Academy of Sinology at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David. Now, the Academy is honoured and delighted to have you join us as we continue to explore topics in ancient Chinese thought that offer fresh perspectives and fresh insights for our lives today. Just before we begin, a friendly reminder to ensure that our cameras are turned off and our microphones are muted to prevent disruption during the presentations. And we have 4 talks organised for this session. For the first talk, I'm delighted to welcome my colleague, Dr. Catherine No, to present and take us through the central value of family and family reverence. Now, for those who may not know, Catherine graduated from her master's from the Academy in 2018, and she recently completed her doctorate in Sinology this year. Catherine will be presenting on There's No Place Like Home, on family reverence. So thank you very much, Catherine.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my PowerPoint with everyone. So there are many habits that are distinctively Asian, like eating with chopsticks, drinking warm water, and taking off our shoes before we walk into a house. And all of these have their origins and tradition. But perhaps one of the most characteristic aspects of the Asian culture is the central role of the home life and the feelings that we have for our family. This is based on the value of family reverence or filial piety, in Chinese known as xiao. And this family reverence is actually existed across various traditions. So not only Confucianism, but also Taoism and Buddhism. There's a very famous saying that amongst the various forms of virtuous conduct, family reverence is foremost. And so when we look at the history of family reverence in China, I like to use the words of an American sinologist, Donald Holzman, who was one of the earliest Western scholars to write about this topic. And he concludes that the homage of children rendered to their parents is at the very heart of Chinese culture. This family reverence is what binds together successive generations. And he believed that it is thanks to this that Chinese culture has endured so long. But I guess the question that I'm often asked is family reverence in the changing world that we live in, with changed social and family dynamics, is it still relevant? And I will argue today that family reverence is still relevant. And I'll take you through some empirical studies as well as close readings of the ancient texts. So if we start with the contemporary studies, research in the last 2 decades has demonstrated that care for one's elderly parents remains prevalent. So there's a study, one of these studies was conducted in 2013 and analysed the responses of nearly 6,000 participants across mainland China, Hong Kong and Taiwan. And they found that family reverence remains highly valued in these contemporary societies. Related to this, there was also statistically significant positive correlation with the provision of elderly care by these children, adult children. And this included care ranging from emotional support to financial assistance and physical help around the home. Another study in the same year provides empirical evidence from approximately over 5,500 participants, but this time from mainland China, Taiwan, Japan, and Korea. And this study showed that the percentage of parents living with their adult children was around 23 to 47%. And this was used as a key behavioral indicator of family reverence. The study also showed that the majority of the adult respondents would frequently have contact with their parents. And on top of that, they also provided frequent support in terms of either financial support or help with household chores. So these two studies are just some of the very many studies that pointed to previous literature as well about this particular area, and that we can see that family reverence and this idea of caring for one's elderly parents remains valued despite modernization, smaller family size, etc. But you might say that family values being important in Asian societies is not really surprising. But what about in non-Asian societies? Amy Lim and her colleagues published a paper in February this year, and they surveyed around 300 Americans, 161 of which identified as Caucasians, and just over 100 identifying as Asians. The mean age was around 40 years old. And they were asked about their attitude towards filial piety, towards caring for their elderly parents, and what kind of behaviours they exhibited. How did they care for their parents? And the results were very interesting. It demonstrated that caring for one's elderly parents was also practiced in Western societies. And in fact, there was no difference in this reciprocal filial piety between both Asian and Caucasian Americans. Now, these are, of course, preliminary findings, but they really bring together a lot of work that's looked at family feeling, or you could say family reverence, as a universal affect that children have towards their parents. So, for example, in this same article by Lim and her colleagues, they cited from literature showing that in other cultures, there was also this care for elders. So, in the United States, there are 80 to 90% of all care to elders is provided by family members, and over half of this is provided by adult children. In the UK, approximately 75% of elderly people receive some form of care from their adult children or spouses. And in fact, these studies actually show that non-Asian individuals also have positive attitudes towards giving care to their parents. In a national survey of the United States, 57% of family caregivers described it as being enjoyable and rewarding. Other studies also identified additional benefits, like a sense of pride in making our parents happy, feeling happy about earning their gratitude and repaying the kindness of our parents. Moreover, these rewards and benefits continued as they aged. So these respondents also said that by caring for their parents, they also felt more prepared for their own age. Not only did their relationship with parents improve, but also relationships with other family members. They also felt a sense of personal satisfaction in spending time caring for their parents, as well as a pride in cooperating to meet their parents' needs. Now, these findings suggest that care for parents, this sort of family feeling, is not only found in Asian countries, but that these non-Asians also felt the same. They also held very positive attitudes towards caring for their elderly parents. This is all very interesting research because we often think of family reverence as something that's Asian. Now, how did all of this research develop? Well, we know, of course, that family reverence in Asian societies has long been an important topic for philosophers, historians, and other scholars. In around the last 50 years, psychologists also have conducted systematic studies on family reverence. Why? Because they wanted to understand the impact of social modernization on the individual. Early research from the 1980s resulted in somewhat conflicting findings as to whether family reverence had an overall harmful or helpful effect on modern society. And this was largely because of the tools that were used. So how they were asking the participants, what they were asking the participants. So when they asked about, parental attitudes like, being very strict, disciplined, controlling, and, whether the children felt a sense of restraint and repression because of not being able to express themselves, well, these kinds of attitudes were not surprisingly found to be diminishing in modern society. But researchers who focused on the parent-child relationship as a whole, they found that this family reverence actually supported harmony, warmth, love, and closer family ties. And this had a very beneficial effect on the personal growth and interpersonal relationships of the actual child. So these studies demonstrated that family values were not diminishing and that mutual interdependence of family members remained strong despite changes in living arrangements in modern society. You might be thinking, why the difference? Well, that's because early researchers didn't analyze the thought processes underlying family reverence. They simply focused on traditional beliefs. In 2003, a new model teased out two psychological factors, reciprocity and authoritarianism. And this led to a clearer analysis of family reverence. So first, this reciprocity, so reciprocal filial piety. This develops out of a genuine affection from long-time positive interactions with their parents on a daily basis. And it's rooted in an intimacy that fulfills a psychological need for a relatedness between two people in the context of the parent-child relationship. Now, this is interesting on a psychological level, but what does it mean for the actual children? Like, how do they demonstrate these attitudes? Well, these children were provided care and support for their parents voluntarily, and they did so out of a genuine gratitude for the efforts and sacrifices that their parents had made for them. And this kind of support encompassed emotional, spiritual support, but also as their parents aged, it also involved physical and financial care. Now, because this kind of reciprocal family filial piety is sort of based on a sharing and greater communication between parent and child. This reciprocal filial piety was positively correlated with the child's better interpersonal skills, psychosocial adjustment, and also emotional support of parents and life satisfaction. So all very positive kind of flow-on effects to the rest of their life. If we look at this idea of authoritarian filial piety, what this means is that the children felt there was a sense of they needed to be obedient and abide by certain role obligations as a child within the hierarchy of a family, and the parent being seen as the utmost authority of that family hierarchy. And because of this, they felt the need to satisfy parental demands and expectations. And if they didn't, they felt that they would be judged. So by doing so, they sort of felt more consistent with a sense of a collective identity, sort of social belonging, meeting the needs of their parents as well as what they thought the community would think of them as a child. And what did this lead to in terms of behavior? Well, they would suppress their own wishes and comply with their parents' wishes. And not surprisingly, this correlated with emotional sort of maladaptation, depression, a sense of anxiety, and also personal stress. So obviously you can see that there's sort of two types that you can tease out of this idea of family reverence based on different ideas. And this dual model of family reverence took into account these two somewhat divergent ideas of family reverence. And it was this model that was used in the contemporary studies to understand how this value applies to society today. So if we go back to that cross-cultural study by Amy Lin and her colleagues, we can see that what they found was that there was no difference in the scores in reciprocal filial piety between Asian and Caucasian Americans. And they said that this suggested a sense of a cultural universality. Family feelings are culturally universal. This is what they suggested. And not only that, but this reciprocal filial piety was also associated with an attitude of caring and actual behaviors of care behaviors. So by this time, obviously, this is really the tip of the iceberg of a lot of research in this field, in which psychologists have begun to rethink family reverence, not simply as an Asian value, but as a psychological universal. Now, what does this mean? It's a psychological phenomenon that takes place in a certain context across cultures. And so in this case, it's the context of the parent-child relationship. Because everyone has parents, and it's a matter of trying to understand how to create mutually supportive and loving relationships within our family. And to that end, we can learn from others. We can learn from other cultures, from philosophy, from history, to try to create the best family relationships in our world, in our lives today. So this is particularly a very popular subject because of the global aging population as well, and trying to find strategies around it. So this research really challenges us to think outside of silos, that family reverence shouldn't be pigeonholed as an Asian value, but rather thought of as a psychological universal, something that occurs throughout different cultures, this family feeling. So there's a lot of research, actually, not just in psychology, but also aged care, sociology, and population studies. But now let's return to Sinology and the ancient texts, where we might begin to understand how and why family reverence continues to be prevalent to this day. So when we look at evidence from early China, it shows us that actually family reverence, this xiao, predates Confucius. So the earliest appearance of the word xiao was on a bronze vessel that dates roughly to around 1000 BCE. But of course, it's through the texts that are attributed to Confucius and other early Confucians that we really find the elaboration of this particular value. The fact that xiao, this family reverence, becomes a very central value and practice that's crucially related to developing and realizing our human potential, which Confucius terms humanity or ren. So that's why when we read the Analects, in the very second passage in the Analects, tells us that the exemplary person works on the foundation, family reverence and fraternity, so this love and care for parents and siblings, are they not the foundation of humanity? So in other words, it's telling us that we as children, how we relate to our parents throughout our lives is actually the very key to developing the greatest virtue and the utmost excellence. And family is something that we all have. We all have parents. So it's worth trying to understand what it is that we can do to create the best relationships with them and what exactly this family reverence means. So in order to explore this concept further, we naturally turn to the authoritative reference in the Confucian tradition on this topic, which is fittingly titled The Classic of Family Reverence. And this classic was read and studied by the princes and generations of scholars since the 2nd century BCE in China. Basically describes a conversation between Confucius and one of his prominent students, Zhengzi, or Zhengsheng. And the definition of filial piety is expressed and articulated in the very first chapter. So let's take a look at this now. Tells us, or Confucius says, that our physical person, this physical self, every strand of hair, every part of our skin, and also everything inside us is received from our parents. Being cautious, vigilant, not allowing anything to harm and injure this physical self is where family reverence begins. But that's not where it ends, it continues. We have to distinguish ourselves, establish our character, walk the proper way in the world, and raise our name high for future generations, bringing esteem to our parents. And it's in these things that family reverence finds its consummation. So family reverence begins in service to parents, continues in service to our leaders, and culminates in distinguishing ourselves in the world. So you can see that the scope is extensive, but it can be analysed as sort of 3 phases. First, a consideration of those within our family, with our parents being representative. And then beyond the family, in the community, with consideration of our leaders as representative. And then to all other aspects of our life. So let's begin with looking at the home life. How do we show this consideration for our parents? In other words, how do we give our parents peace of mind? And it's very simple, as Confucius said. It begins by actually looking after ourselves. So I don't know if anyone's been to the children's emergency department before, but if you have, it's very common to see parents bring in their sick children, right? But if you look closer, oftentimes the parents are actually more distressed than the child. And if you take bloods or you inject the child, both the child and the parents will be crying. And why is that? Because the parents see the child as themselves. And so they don't feel well or rest well until their child feels normal. And this is not just for young children. You know, if we're in our 30s or 40s and we have an accident, we need to go to the hospital, well, who's going to be visiting and looking after us after discharge? Likely our family. Similarly, if we have depression, anxiety, etc., and we're not able to continue our studies or our work, then who picks up the pieces of our life? Again, likely our family. So this looking after our physical and mental health is so important because it helps us be independent and at least not be a burden for our parents, giving them peace of mind. Now, we have to remember, of course, that Confucius was not talking to children, he was actually talking to adults. And these people came to learn from Confucius because they wanted to improve their quality of life, develop excellence, and ultimately realize their potential. So when Confucius was talking to them, he was talking to adults. Now, of course, we would all agree that self-care and healthy living are very important. But Confucius tells us that this the way we look after ourselves, the way we think about it, we should think about it as, yes, we are looking after ourselves, but it's not primarily for ourselves. Now, what do I mean by this? We look after ourselves in consideration of others. And that is the difference. So 2 people could be going to the gym. One person is doing it for themselves. The other person is doing it in consideration of others, and that makes the difference. So that's what Confucius was getting at. It's in the thought, not the action. So consideration of ourselves the consideration of others is so important. And in the first instance, it's grounded in the family. And in particular, being considerate of the feelings of our parents. Now, there are good reasons for this. You know, we've known our parents for the longest, since the day we were born. And they've nurtured and developed us in so many different ways. It's not just this physical form that we receive from our parents, including the nurture and the nourishment we received from our mother when we were in the womb. But our parents have actually helped us take the first steps in life, including physically, mentally, emotionally, and morally. And so Roger Ames and Henry Rosemont Jr., who translated the classic of family reverence, write in their introduction that it is beyond dispute that the home is the most influential context for the well-being of the child on various levels: intellectual, social, emotional, and moral development. Among the most significant research in the field of human development is that of the attachment between the infant and their caregiver, so in most cases, the parent, because this attachment, this relationship, is the foundation for our relationship with all others. So that's where it all begins, this first relationship that we have. Now, it might be easy for us to understand about how we develop it intellectually and socially through this bond with our parents, but it might be more difficult to think about moral development, because obviously our parents don't sit us down and give us moral lessons. So, Professor John Day has provided very good analysis of this idea of trust that I'd like to share with you. So he says, trust, the earliest form of trust in human life is the infant's trust in its mother. Trust in this case develops in response to the mother's love. So this is when the infant recognizes through the mother's attention to the infant's wants and needs, through the actions she takes to satisfy them, and through her accompanying facial and vocal expressions, the infant recognizes this constant benevolent desire for the infant's happiness. So the mother has this constant desire to keep their infant, this love for their infant. And even before we can walk or talk, we are already sensing this. We're already developing the early ideas about trust. And this becomes the foundation for how we deal with others throughout our lives. Trust with friends, other members of the community, etc. This is very interesting that it develops at such an early age. So consideration of our others therefore begins with consideration of our family and that of our parents. And this obviously makes sense because we're mindful of the many ways that they've nurtured us. And you can see that this is actually the very basis of what we talked about before, the reciprocal filial piety or family reverence. Now, if we keep this in mind, this consideration, then we'll understand the following passages from the ancient texts. So this is a conversation between Confucius and one of his students named Zilu. So Zilu once asks, there's a person who spends all day tilling the fields until their hands and feet are thickly calloused, and they do so to care for their parents. But why is it that this person lacks a reputation for family reverence? Confucius replies, that one is not deemed to have family reverence without respectfulness, without humility in their speech, and without an amiable manner towards their parents. Interestingly, this particular conversation is recorded in other texts as well, such as the esoteric commentary on the Classic of Odes by Master Han, and also school sayings of Confucius. So this shows us that this position was not simply that of one philosopher or one school at the time. But the main message in this conversation is that it's not about what we do under the guise of caring for our parents, nor is it how much we do for them, but how we do it. So it's in our attitude. And if we do it begrudgingly out of obligation, or we do it because we're actually trying to seek some fame for ourselves, be recognized as virtuous, or any other reason other than simply a willingness to love and care and contribute to the family, what happens is our attitude will suffer. And it will show through the different ways we act towards our parents. Now, there are two similar passages that help develop this idea further, and they're from the Analects. So first of all, this is another student, Zixia, who asks about family reverence. And Confucius says, very simply, it's in the attitude that matters. Now, I've bolded in Chinese the characters that this particular sentence, how it's translated, because it's quite interesting. In Chinese, 色难, 色 refers to, or literally means our facial expressions. And then nan means difficulty. So actually, in some translations, it's the fact that it's difficult maintaining an amiable facial expression or countenance when asked to do things by one's parents. And that's very easy to understand. You know, when our parents ask us to help them, maybe with household chores, run errands, etc., we might not outwardly complain or refuse, but we do so with a sense of reluctance. And I guess when we complete these chores with an annoyance, it's very obvious. So Confucius is telling us, well, family reverence is not just helping them out, doing the job. It's more than that. It's ensuring that they are worry-free, that they're happy. So they're not going to be happy if we're going to be doing this in an angry mood. So ultimately, where does this facial expression come from? Well, it arises from our state of mind, right? It arises from whether or not we're willing to help and how much we care. And then this actually affects how we do it. So are we doing the job just to get it done, or are we actually putting our heart and effort into it? So then Confucius poses a question. He says, if we simply sort of treat our parents in the same way that we serve our teachers, is this the standard for family reverence? Now, we sort of have to understand, of course, that the traditional sort of teacher and student relationship was based on this idea of respect. But Confucius actually tells us, really, by this rhetorical question, that in fact, it's different. So the parent-child relationship is much more grounded in a natural, intrinsic, and unconditional love. And that's very different from the teacher-student relationship. So in other words, it's not enough to just treat our parents as if we would our teachers. So this really goes to the very heart of the matter in a way, that family reverence is to do it with one's heart. And this is seen, yes, we can help out our parents, do chores, etc., but it has to stem from the heart. Similarly, in the next passage, another student, Ziyou, asks about family reverence as well. And Confucius says that in his times, people would think they were dutiful just because they supported their parents. Yet dogs and horses are able to do something in the way of support. Unless there is respect, where is the difference? So this was a common misconception during the times of Confucius, but it's also a common misconception today, that simply providing for our parents material or physical needs or even financially is all there is to family reverence. And so Confucius draws a very stark contrast. He says, well, look at the horse and the dog, right? In those days, the dogs were helpful around the house. They kept guard. Horses were for farm work. Well, the horses and the dogs are able to serve their masters as well, but they lack respectfulness. And it's respectfulness that ultimately distinguishes the service of filial children to their parents from the service of horses and hounds to their masters. Interestingly, another ancient interpretation takes the dogs and horses to mean the parents. So it's like Confucius saying that children simply treat their parents as if dogs and horses, just give them shelter, give them food, and that's all there is. So essentially it is the same kind of interpretation, because it still says that, you know, children simply support their parents physically. And Confucius obviously says that this is not enough. So let's think about the modern context. A lot of people would say they are very dutiful because they might have bought their parents a house, they pay the bills, pay for holidays, give their parents a monthly allowance, and et cetera, and they feel that they're doing a lot. But most of it is mainly to do with either financial support or even physical help around the house. And because they do this, they feel that they're giving a lot, it results in a very arrogant attitude. They expect their parents to be grateful. And so many studies show that, in fact, parents today don't want to live with their children, adult children, because they don't want to put up with this attitude. And they're worried becoming a burden. So Confucius is saying, he's not negating the fact that we need to support our parents financially or materially, but he's saying that we need to do more. There has to be this respectfulness. And respectfulness is not simply going through the motions, but it's actually also about this deeper understanding. You know, do we know what our parents are thinking? How they're feeling? What makes them happy? What are they worried about? So that is what Confucius is talking about. And it's even related to that concept of fraternity, which is how we relate to other family members, how we relate to our brothers and sisters. So there's a very good discussion of how fraternity, how we relate to our siblings, is associated with family reverence. In the children's primer, the Di Zi Gui, it says that older siblings should love and care for younger ones. Younger siblings should love and respect the older ones. And if we get along with our siblings, then that's a sign of respecting our parents and caring that they're happy, because our parents would want harmony between their children. So this then relates back to the studies that we mentioned earlier that showed that reciprocal filial piety had positive associations with life satisfaction, social competence, etc. And you can sort of understand that association, because think of it, this child, or you know, whether they're in childhood or they're adults, they're constantly sort of thinking about how their parents are feeling, developing this empathy. And this empathy, this skill, can then be transferable, be used in work life, be used towards their friends, etc., all other interpersonal relationships. And that's why they are associated with higher social competence. So you can see that even away from the family, family reverence still helps us develop a mature, level-headed approach to life. And this is even more apparent when you look at the next passage. On this one, it's very short. Meng Wubo asks about family reverence, a very hot topic, as you can see. And interestingly, Meng Wubo is a member of the ruling house in the state of Lu, where this is the home state of Confucius. And it's really significant that he's asking about family reverence in a way, because Confucian learning, which is grounded in humanity and this idea of family feeling, is applicable to all people from all walks of life, whatever career they have. And he is one of the state leaders. So it's important for him too to be understanding about this family feeling. Now, Confucius keeps it short. He says, the only time one should have parents worry is when we are ill. Now, doesn't that contradict what we said before about how we shouldn't make our parents worry about our physical or mental health, right? How is this different? Well, Confucius is saying that the only time we should allow our parents to worry is when we're ill. Now, I'll ask you this. How many people do you know who have never gotten the common cold or never gotten sick before? Even young people who have strong immune systems will inevitably get the common cold, get a headache or a runny nose at some point in their lives. And so Confucius is saying that some things are out of our control, like the illness, particularly contagious diseases. So he's saying that other than this particular instance, this illness, like a runny nose, a common cold, other than this, our parents shouldn't have to worry about anything else about us. In other words, they shouldn't have to worry any more than this. So what does that mean? It means that our studies, our work, friends we associate with, our extracurriculars, all these sorts of things, we have full ownership and control of, and we shouldn't make our parents worry about it. Now, you might say that's very unrealistic because my parents worry about everything. They worry too much and they really should just relax. Well, think about it this way. Our parents have had a lot more life experience than us. And if they worry, then there's often a good reason. Perhaps we haven't considered all the potential options or the issues. Or it could be that in the past, we haven't demonstrated our organizational abilities and we haven't given them peace of mind. So they have had to worry for us. So rather than ignoring them, we have to prove it to them. Prove it to them that we can organize our lives and they don't have to worry. Think from their perspective. And what are they looking for? How can we give them peace of mind? You know, at the end of the day, who benefits? By planning ahead, we are actually looking after ourselves and we're also being considerate of others. So it's actually a win-win situation. So you can see, of course, that Confucius is very detailed in his instructions on family reverence. But this detail is not related to specific actions, at least not in the Analects. It's more related to our mindset, this developing a mindset of genuine care. Because if we can tap into this genuine care, it gives rise to infinite potential. You know, we can take this mindset and apply it in any situation, any time, any place. Now, by this time, of course, we're probably thinking that we should try to give our parents peace of mind. Yes, that's important. Make them happy and proud of us. But do we have to do everything that they say? This was, if you remember, a key factor that differentiated the two types of filial piety, right? Reciprocity and authoritarianism. If we look back at the sources, the ancient texts, you can see that listening to everything that our parents did was not the original idea at all. In fact, there's an entire chapter in the classic of family reverence that's dedicated to this idea. I've just taken an extract from this chapter though, but you can see that it's about helping our parents change, right? It states, if confronted by reprehensible behavior on their parents' part, a child has no choice but to remonstrate with their parent. Since remonstrance, so this idea of telling them that they're wrong, providing different opinions, disagreeing, this is what remonstrance means, is since remonstrance is the only response to immorality on the part of our parents, how could simply obeying the commands of one's parents be deemed family reverence? So this is Confucius talking to Zhenzi. So clearly in the previous examples, we were talking about how we relate to our parents, how we consider the feelings of our parents. In this particular passage, though, it's about helping them change, helping them lead meaningful lives. So it's slightly different. How do we do this? First, of course, we need to identify the times when we should remonstrate, when we should sort of provide constructive criticism and feedback. And Xunzi identifies a few times when children shouldn't listen to the instructions of their parents. It's based on, the outcome of the instruction and what we need to do to carry out this instruction. So he says we shouldn't listen if it causes danger to the family, if it causes disgrace to the family, or if it requires acting against ritual etiquette to achieve the desired outcome. So in these cases, we shouldn't listen. We should remonstrate. And then he concludes by saying that we follow the dictates of the way rather than those of one's leader. We follow the requirements of morality rather than the wishes of one's parents. So really the dictates of the way and the requirements of morality is point to the same thing. There are objective standards in the classics and the texts which tell us how to live our lives in harmony with not only our parents, our family, but the community. And so if the wishes of our parents jeopardizes the way, the harmony, then that's a time when we need to remonstrate. Now, Zhong Zhangtong from the 2nd century, a very prominent statesman, he also identified certain situations. So, for example, if our parents ask us to seek a legal retribution, appoint the incompetent, they want to live extravagantly, they look down, don't deem education or virtuous scholars as important, or if they don't provide assistance to a friend in need. In these times and situations, we should also not listen. Now, you'll probably think, well, there's only 6 sort of points here, but essentially there's an underlying principle. And again, it is about this idea of ritual etiquette, or this idea of in keeping with the state laws, and also the way. So this sort of helps inspire us in sort of thinking about this idea in a bit more detail. So this is obviously related to the ancient context, but I'm sure we can sort of think about it from the modern context as well. Essentially, the point is that we have to know how to help our parents and our family members overcome their faults. So first thing is identifying when to remonstrate. Okay? The second is understanding how to remonstrate. And there's this particular passage which helps us with this question. So Confucius says that when we serve our parents, when we take care of them, we should remonstrate at the first signs of fault. So the first signs of fault, this is very interesting because that actually means that we have to understand our parents at a certain level. We have to understand what their baseline is in terms of their thoughts, words, and actions before we can detect any signs of fault, before we can detect them going down the wrong path, right? So this implies that we actually are very conscious and aware and have a very good relationship with our parents in the first place. And then it says that, we have to intervene. So, and then if we see that they don't take our advice, be all the more respectful and don't contradict them and don't become bitter. So when we intervene is also a very good question, because we have to do it when they're in a good mood, and recognizing that good mood, engendering, facilitating that good mood. First of all, they have to have good feelings about you. They have to trust you as their child. So you have to work to gain that trust so that what you say, they will take into account. And then, create this good mood where they can be accepting of any criticism. And then on top of that, if they don't take your advice, you've tried once, you have to keep trying. And every time you keep trying, you can't give up. You have to continue to be respectful and continue to love and care for them and not judge them. In fact, when we do this, we can sometimes think about how our parents helped us when we were young overcome our own faults. Sometimes it took years before we actually changed. So this helps us understand this patience that we have to have. It's going to take time, but we need to continue to show respectfulness. We have to not give up. So you can see that just from this small passage, it takes a lot of interpersonal awareness to be able to do something like this, to be able to identify the signs, to be able to identify a good moment to raise an issue. And then, even if they disagree, if they get annoyed, to keep trying again and again without giving up on them. It takes a certain level of understanding and awareness of the other person. So this kind of training that we do in the family, these skills that we learn within the family, they're highly transferable because this is a very important way in which we deal with others. If we see something happening in the workplace, the community, and we have this trust with the other person, as Kelly mentioned previously with our friends, we also need to help them too. So it's about, in a way, being able to read between the lines, what a person says and does, but ultimately we have to understand what they're thinking. And we do this by training ourselves through the understanding that we have of our parents, because that's the longest relationship, one of the longest relationships that we'll have in our lives. And if we can understand our parents, if we can help them, empathize with them, then that ability and that skill is just limitless, isn't it? We can take it to the rest of our life, through the rest of our lives. So as you can see, family reverence is this holistic care. Of course, it entails financial, physical, material support for our parents, but also emotional and moral support. You can see from this three-stage process in the classic of family reverence that this consideration of parents doesn't end when we go to work, if we move out of the home, if we live overseas. Why? Because we still need to look after ourselves, and we do so in consideration of others. Later in life, as it says here, we have to be considerate of our leaders and practice the proper way. What does that mean? Well, we take those skills that we learned within the family, this conscientiousness, this empathy, etc., and bring it to our workplace, where we're able to then help people beyond our family. And that is to practice the proper way, good communication skills, etc. And in fact, if you think about it, these are all qualities that even modern day companies would be looking for in their employees. So that's why family reverence is still relevant. Now, ultimately, it's not enough to have a happy home life, good work relationships, and be able to earn a living. Family reverence motivates us to achieve utmost excellence because we cultivate ourselves, we improve ourselves, not just with our parents in mind. We have to think about the people who've come before us. If we think about it scientifically, the genes in our body, yes, half of them come from our parents, and the other half of them come from both our parents. But essentially, if you think about it, the genes of our parents come from their parents, and so on and so forth. So really, this physical body is actually an embodiment of all those who've come before us through our very genes. But on another level, our identity, our mental makeup, our values actually stem from a cultural tradition. And so we're not only genetically linked to our ancestors, the people in the past, but also culturally we inherit their traditions and values. So this is what Roger Ames and Rosemont Jr. talk about. They say, keeping this body intact. The body is not just the physical body. This body embodies the tradition, and we draw upon it creatively as a resource for distinguishing ourselves in the world and contributing to further cultural resources. So the body of the cultural tradition is embodied in each of us, each generation, and it's perpetuated or continued for those to come. Family reverence, then, is about preserving and passing on the very best for the future generations, our culture, the environment, etc. And this is actually very well encapsulated by the Chinese character for family reverence itself. It's actually made up of two parts, a top and a bottom. Now, the bottom part, we'll start off first. You can see this circle and the middle. It's actually meant to look like the picture here of this child, a swaddled infant with their arms left out so that they can be active and wriggle around. And it's an interesting observation that the ancients who created this character thought about how, this is what children are like. This is how they are swaddled when they're young. Now, here, of course, this character is not just representing a child, an infant, but really the younger generations. The top part of the character is an abbreviated form of the character for old, you can see here, and it originally connoted a person whose hair was turning white. And here, of course, it's not just talking about any old person, but the older generations. So in this one character, it brings together the former generations, the older generations, with the younger and the future generations. And so in this one character, this concept of intergenerational harmony and unity is expressed. And essentially, this unity occurs through the feelings of family reverence, this care and consideration that we have, not only for our parents, but those who've come before us. So family reverence, in fact, benefits both parent and child. You see, it's a win-win situation. We care for our parents, but we also care for ourselves. We care for ourselves in consideration of our parents as a starting point to our humanity. So family reverence, as you can see, was not only significant during the times of Confucius, but also today. It's not only applicable to Asian countries, but it's also can be considered a universal affect. And so family reverence remains ever relevant and practical in our world today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for another very thoughtful talk. I wonder if anybody has any questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. We might have time for maybe one or two questions, or alternatively, you can type your question into the chat window and I can take it from there. if we don't have any questions, I'm just conscious of the time. Just double check. Anyone would like to ask a question? You've given us a lot of food for thought there. Well, given that there are no questions and given the time, I'm going to thank you very much, Catherine, again. I'm going to move along to the next talk, and I have the honour of taking you through the next talk entitled Tools for Mental Health and Wellbeing. Now let me share my slides. Okay. Now, when we think of mental health, we may think of mental disorders, which are a significant global health issue. And the reason why I say that is because according to the World Health Organization, let me just jump to the beginning of my slides. I'll start again. So I'm talking about tools for mental health and well-being. When we think about mental health, many people think about mental disorders, which are a significant global health issue today. And the reason why I say this is because according to the World Health Organization, depression is one of the leading causes of disability. Around 1 in 5 children and adolescents around the world have a mental health condition. Suicide is the second most common cause of death among young people. And in fact, people with severe mental health conditions die 10 to 20 years earlier than the general population. And in economic terms, anxiety and depression, they're the top 2 most common mental health conditions, and together they're costing the global economy about $1 trillion every year. Now, mental health is not simply the absence of disorder, just as our health is not merely the absence of disease. Now, according to a global report from the World Health Organization this year, defines mental health as a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, to realize their abilities, to learn well and work well, and to contribute to their communities. Now, today, I want to talk about how Confucian thought might contribute to mental health and well-being by providing different perspectives on these 3 topics, on the topic of realizing our potential, on our worries in life, and making the most of life circumstances. So without further ado, realizing our potential. We often talk about realizing our potential, but what exactly do we mean? And particularly from a Confucian perspective. I'd like to introduce you to, for those of you who may not know, Mencius is the Chinese philosopher who lived about 100 years after Confucius in the 4th century before the Common Era. And he's respected as the second sage in the Confucian tradition, second only to Confucius himself. And during Mencius's time, the authority, the order of the Zhou ruling house, the Zhou dynasty, had declined, such that the political situation had become volatile. Various states were vying with each other for power and waging war against each other. So Mencius lived in what was called the Warring State period. Now, during this time, politicians, statesmen, and many people, they looked to the philosophers and other scholars for governing strategies and ideas. Now, it's traditionally thought that Mencius studied under Confucius's grandson, Zisu, or one of his students. Mencius, he practiced, he taught, he developed Confucius's teachings. He defended Confucius's teachings in face of the competing theories at the time. Well, Mencius spent much of his career traveling from state to state, meeting with rulers and hoping to influence their policies in hopes that people could recover the traditional values and rituals that had once made their society, strong and humane. Mencius was the first Chinese philosopher to advocate that human nature is innately good. This goodness is, according to Mencius, a limitless, boundless potential to bring out moral excellence in ourselves and in others. According to Mencius, this goodness can be broken down into 4 moral qualities. They're humanity, rightness, propriety, wisdom. Now, briefly speaking, humanity is a sense of compassion for others. Rightness involves doing the right thing, and a sense of shame in doing what is dishonorable. Then propriety is a sense of respect for others. Wisdom involves sound judgment and reasoning, and taking into account the interests of self, others, the common good. Now, these are certainly great virtues to have, but some might question whether we really have such greatness, especially when people can often be self-centered. Does everyone really have this innate potential for moral goodness? Well, Mencius goes on to explain using a very famous thought experiment. He explains that, my reason for saying that no person is devoid of a heart sensitive to the suffering of others is this. Suppose a person suddenly saw a young child about to fall into a well. They would certainly be moved to compassion, not because they want to get in the good graces of the parents, nor because they wish to win the praise of their neighbours and friends, nor yet because they dislike the cry of the child. From this, it can be seen that whoever is devoid of the heart of compassion is not human. Whoever is devoid of the heart of shame is not human. Whoever is devoid of the heart of deference, this respectfulness, is not human. And whoever is devoid of the heart of right and wrong is not human. And the idea here is that any person who suddenly sees a helpless child about to fall into a well would be automatically, instinctively feel moved to try to do something to prevent this. They would feel moved to spontaneously try to prevent the child from falling. And some self-interested calculation. So at the core of Mencius's theory of character cultivation is a belief in the innate goodness and the moral qualities and the moral inclination of human nature. And Mencius goes on to explain that the heart of compassion is the sprout of humanity, the heart of shame, the sprout of rightness, the heart of deference, the sprout of propriety, the heart of right and wrong, the sprout of wisdom. A person has these 4 sprouts just as they have 4 limbs. So what Mencius means is not that all people are necessarily good, nor that we are born good, but that we all have the capacity to become good. This is because human beings naturally possess certain active, observable dispositions for becoming good. And they're what Mencius here calls the sprouts of virtues. And they're the 4 moral qualities we mentioned before: humanity, rightness, propriety, and wisdom. And they're called sprouts because they're the beginnings of virtue, of altruistic feeling and caring dispositions. Now, interestingly, when we look at the Chinese character for sprout, and have that here, this is how we write the character today, it's made up of 2 components, one on the left and the other on the right. The one on the left is meant to depict a person standing on something. It could be the surface of a table, it could be the ground, it could be a surfboard. It's just an indicator that the person is standing on top of some surface. So it uses that sort of a symbol to convey the idea of to stand or to establish. So this is the character for to stand up or to establish something. On the right side is another component, And this is the component for the initial part of something, the start of something. And how it conveys that meaning is through, you have the horizontal line, indicating sort of the soil level, the ground, and you have a plant, a young plant just sprouting up through the soil level with its roots extending below, sort of the start, the initial part of the life of a plant is used to symbolize, convey the idea of the initial phase of something. So you have a combination of initial and establishment that is put together to mean sprout. And this character alerts us to the fact that these are nascent altruistic feelings that have the propensity to grow and blossom into full virtues. Mencius asserts that the 4 sprouts are as fundamental to the human constitution as our arms and legs. No one can claim that they don't have these moral qualities because they're something that each and every human being is born with. Mencius goes on to say that, for have these 4 sprouts and then claim that they're not capable of developing them is to prevent themselves from realizing their innate potential for moral goodness. So Mencius tells us that the capacity for virtue is innate to all human beings, but must be cultivated and developed, like what this young fellow is doing here. So how do we do this? When they're sprouts, they need to grow. Well, Mencius explains that an individual develops their moral sprouts by using the mind to reflect on themselves and their conditions. Mencius believed that we can help grow and develop our moral sensibilities through reflection, as he puts it. The job of the mind is to reflect. If it reflects, then it will get virtue. If it doesn't reflect, then it won't get it. So by being mindful and attentive of our thoughts, motivations, desires, feelings, and then assessing, evaluating our words and deeds, people will discover that not only that they do in fact care about others, but also that by such focusing on their moral sprouts leads them to act morally and enjoy a fulfilling, flourishing life. Now, this is not to say that it doesn't take work to change the way we think and talk and behave, but it's worth it because such positives from moral action, along with a parallel sense of shame and disapproval in misconduct, propels us to become good. So Mencius uses this analogy here with the water to that all human beings have this innate potential for moral excellence. He writes that human nature's being good is like water tending to flow downwards. There's no human who does not tend towards goodness, just as there's no water that doesn't flow down. So I think overall, Confucian perspective offers an incredibly empowering starting point. To understand that inside each and every one of us are these moral sprouts, the virtues, beginnings of virtue that we can and should develop through conscious reflection and following the greater parts of ourselves. Now, this ties in with the Confucian position that human beings have this moral greatness to love and care for all beings that is no less than the virtues of heaven and earth. What are the virtues of heaven and earth? Well, from a Confucian perspective, I'm not talking about the Christian heaven, the heaven and earth, if you can understand, they sort of are appreciated as unconditional, sheltering and accommodating all beings everywhere, every day, unconditionally. And human beings have this moral greatness that is no less than that. So it's an incredibly empowering and positive idea that certainly puts us in the driver's seat in terms of our mental health. So that's realizing our potential. Now, if I turn to our worries, what are we worried about? Now, being able to cope with stress is very important to mental health. Now, stress arises from our worries. And in the Analects, we find that Confucius reminds us of what we worry about and what we should worry about. In the Analects, Confucius said, don't worry that you have no position. Worry about how you can qualify for one. Don't worry that people don't know you. Seek to be worthy of being known. Now, you might think that it's a little bit repetitive. What is he trying to say here? Well, this might bring to mind, people scrambling for a high-flying job. They might be after some, position in a leadership position in an organization or some high role within the community. And these positions often come with the various trappings of worldly success, for example, like extensive influence, high power, home, cars, expensive holidays. Now, throughout history, wealth, social status, power have been alluring and seductive advantages across all human cultures. And people persist in pursuit of those things. Now, the struggle for wealth and status and power can be fiercely competitive. And that's why they call it the rat race. And it's inevitable that some people will miss out on those plum jobs. And people tend to worry about missing out. Now, as Erin Klein writes in her book called Little Sprouts and the Tao of Parenting, we find that the ancient Chinese philosophers, Confucius included, they talk more about human flourishing, virtue, happiness, fulfillment. They talk about those things more than worldly success. And this is because they recognize that very often people who lead the happiest, most fulfilling lives, those who really flourish as human beings, they're not necessarily the ones who achieve the success that's measured by academic or athletic achievements, or wealth, prestige, or power. If they do possess those things, their happiness and flourishing doesn't depend on them. Now, it's not that the Chinese philosophers disregarded the importance of material well-being. They knew that there was a difference between the goals of providing for our family and earning the highest salary income, the difference between being valued and appreciated and enjoying power and prestige. The Chinese philosophers believe that defining success narrowly in terms of money, prestige, or power doesn't take into account the real marks of a successful life, a life well lived. For example, at funerals, I don't think you'll ever hear anybody remember or eulogize the deceased by saying, how much his income was, or how many cars or boats he owned, or how he rushed in his field of work. The Chinese philosophers understood human flourishing in moral terms. Those who have truly realized their potential are the ones who have most fully cultivated virtues such as humanity and compassion. Now, they're the ones who have found their true calling or vocation in life. They're able to find that place in the world because by doing what brings joy and meaning to their lives and to the lives of others. And it's those things that enables a person to truly flourish and be fulfilled, not things like how prestigious the job is or how much money they make. The Chinese philosophers would tell us that successful life is measured in how a person treats another, how they love and are loved by their family and friends, and in what they do to make the world gentler, more kind, more humane and more beautiful place. Now, Aaron Klein emphasizes, interestingly, that these values and goals are not uniquely Chinese. Every major religious tradition and the works of numerous philosophers throughout history emphasize the value of leading a happy, flourishing, virtuous life over the pursuit of wealth and prestige. Now, when we miss out on some great role or a high-flying job, Confucius in the Analects offers some constructive advice. We should be concerned not with securing the job, but whether we qualify for it in the first place. Do we really deserve such a job? Have we got what it takes to merit the role? Because very often it's not simply about just being able to do the job, but whether we can use that role to make a positive difference to the organisation and to the community. We might have some knowledge, skills, and experience, but do we also have the vision and integrity that the role calls for? If we haven't ticked all the boxes of the job criteria this time, Confucius encourages us to keep working on ourselves, and particularly our ethical character. For example, can we be trusted with all the responsibilities? Can we deliver on what we promise? And this can make all the difference between one job applicant and the next. Now, the contemporary Confucian scholar, Li Bingnan, also points out that one doesn't necessarily need a high-ranking or high-paying position to make a difference, a meaningful contribution to an enterprise or an organisation. I'm sure we can all think of someone who's gone above and beyond the call of duty, and they're probably not even the CEO. So we can understand why Confucius tells us to focus on qualifying for a position. Now, other than social standing and authority that comes with the top job, there's a matter of name and fame. Many people these days wish to be famous. It's generally considered to be a mark of professional success. Others may not pursue fame as such, but they would still want to be recognised in some way, like being honoured for their contribution to their company or industry, or being applauded for their efforts in volunteering their time and expertise in the community. When people miss out on an award or an accolade, they might naturally feel upset for being overlooked. Now, what would Confucius have to say? Well, again, he would encourage us to think and reflect on anything worthy of being known for. If we happen to achieve fame, we can think about how we can use that for the sake of benefiting others in a meaningful way. How we might use our renown maybe to contribute positively, for example, to giving voice to the community or bringing awareness to worthy causes. A person's lack of recognition now may be a sign that they need to improve themselves. And instead of blaming others for not appreciating talents, it's probably best to focus on our areas of weakness. Whether or not we're capable of contributing a meaningful contribution. Now, Confucius also tells us that, and we can see, many times in the Analects, it seems to be a recurring motif. What you should be worried about, what you shouldn't be worried about. There's a bit of a trend. Confucius also tells us that instead of being concerned that no one recognizes our merits or strengths, we should think about how we might fail to know and understand others. So then the latter, worrying about whether you know other people, understand them, recognize their strengths, is certainly worth worrying about, because if we fail to recognize the merits and strengths of others, well, we won't be able to appreciate and learn from them. We won't be able to recognize good teachers around us. We won't be able to distinguish between the friends that will help us improve our ethical character and those that won't. Or we might promote the glib talkers over the honest and dutiful employees. So there are many downsides should we fail to know and understand others. Now, I wonder if you've ever thought about what Confucius himself would worry about. Well, in the Analects, Confucius articulates 4 worries on his mind. Confucius said that I have not cultivated virtue, that I have not imparted my learning, that I'm unable to do what is right, and that I'm unable to correct my shortcomings. These are my worries. As the consummate teacher, Confucius's foremost concern is that he hasn't cultivated virtue. And Confucius is conscious of actively working on his ethical character, and he's obviously leading by example as the best teachers do. So that's his first worry, that he's not cultivated virtue, his virtuous conduct. Confucius then worries about whether he has imparted all he's been taught, all he's learned, that that knowledge can continue to benefit others. And that's the second worry. The third worry is that he knows what is right, but has failed to put it into practice. He's failed to align his conduct with what is right and conduct himself as he should. That's his third worry. And last but not least, Confucius is worried that there are faults in himself that he is yet to be able to rectify. So these are Confucius's worries. Now, because those worries are fairly general, I would suggest that we don't need to be teachers to share those worries, concerns, and reflect on the same questions. So the Analects makes us think about what it is that we're worried about and what we should be worried about. And hopefully maybe worry less of the things that we shouldn't. Okay. Now, what about making the most of life circumstances? Well, ups and downs in our careers, for example, our roles, our interpersonal relationships with managers, colleagues, family, and friends, they can all be key to our state of mind. And here I take an extract from The Practice of the Mean. Now, The Practice of the Mean is a key Confucian text. Some of you may recognize that it is one of the 4 books that were studied as the core curriculum for the civil service exams that took place in the last 600 years of Imperial China. Now, this quote is attributed to Confucius, and it's about adapting to our circumstances, whatever happens in life. The exemplary person occupies their role and acts accordingly without demanding of others. If they occupy a position of wealth and honour, their actions are appropriate to wealth and honour. If they occupy a position of poverty and loneliness, their actions are appropriate to poverty and lowliness. If they occupy a position among the tribes, then their actions are in accord with those tribes. If they occupy a position of misfortune and hardship, their actions are appropriate to misfortune and hardship. The exemplary person is always at ease. Now, there are actually 4 types of common situations in life. We break it down and we can take them one by one. But notice that this is about the exemplary person, someone who is actively working on their ethical character. So how would, if they're in a position of wealth and honour, how do they act appropriate to that? Let's take a look. Well, there's a story from Tang, China, and it's about the poet Bai Juyi. One day, Bai Juyi, who was then the governor of Hangzhou province, he came to visit a Buddhist master by the name of Miao Chao. And he saw that the master was actually living at the top of a tree above ground. So he asked the master, isn't it dangerous for you to live in such a place? Well, the master didn't think that Bai Juyi himself was in particularly on safe ground. And he replied, you, governor, are in a much more precarious position. Now, Bai Juyi is a person, his feet firmly planted on the ground. You can imagine his surprise. Why should I be in any danger? Well, the master explained, in the midst of power and privilege, should one make the wrong decision, the consequences could be disastrous for oneself and for the people. He's talking to Baiji in public office. So if you think about it, having wealth and honor means we can affect the lives of many others. And so we have to be careful and cautious in what we say and do. So how should we behave? Well, a popular saying springs to mind. With great power comes great responsibility. Now, this power is not just a reference to Spider-Man-like abilities, but I think it encompasses any authority. And the same could be said about wealth. With great wealth comes great responsibility. Having wealth obviously doesn't necessarily mean a person is also respected or honoured, recognised. People can be rich without having such honours at all, like maybe a lottery winner. They win the jackpot overnight and become a wealthy millionaire. Or people can be influential, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're all that wealthy, like some artists. So here the text states that one has both wealth and honor. So the exemplary person is enjoying both privileges. So it's all the more reason to be responsible, to be conscious of the greater good. So wealth is not a license to be extravagant, and having the power of being recognized, influential, is no license to be arrogant. That's because we have to realize that our wealth and honor is derived from others. So, for example, a CEO is a person who heads an organization of employees. Now, if there were no employees, then there really isn't any CEO, is there? So, as Master Xun taught, the ruler is like the boat, and the common people like the water. It is the water that holds the boat up and the water that capsizes it. And that's why we have to act appropriately and responsibly if we happen to be in a position of privilege, either of wealth or honor or both. Now, what happens if we don't have wealth and honor? That's the next scenario. If the exemplary person occupies a position of poverty and loneliness, how do they act appropriately? Well, this is sort of the converse to the earlier scenario. If we look at the epigraph by Liu Yuxi, who's a Confucian scholar, also of the Tang dynasty, Tang China, and he wrote the epigraph of the humble abode. He wrote, "It is not the height of the mountain. The immortal makes it famous." The immortal is someone known to dwell on the mountain, and it's the immortal, the cultivation of the immortal, that makes the mountain well known. It's not the depth of the lake, the dragon known to dwell in its waters. It's the dragon that makes it auspicious. And the dragon is considered quite an auspicious creature in Chinese culture. Now, this is the humble abode, renowned with my virtue. It sort of highlights that what makes something special is not necessarily the external, flashy features and dimensions. It boils down to how we cultivate our ethical character. The achievement of moral excellence is, quite apart from material positions or perceived influence over others. I suppose if I use an everyday analogy, when we're dining with friends, enjoying the company of good friends, it doesn't matter much whether we're eating at home or we're dining out. Some might say that a simple homemade, home-cooked meal made with love could rival, the finest fare at the fanciest restaurants. So I think that sort of is what this line is getting at. And And if you don't have much, well, you'd be surprised that there's much that we can still offer. We can still help others by giving of our time, sharing our knowledge and expertise. A person's generosity doesn't depend on how well off they are. Some people like to pander to others. Some people can be fearful of those with wealth and honor. And this may be because they're not satisfied with their situation. They're seeking for more, and they're hoping to gain that fame and fortune through those people. So this line sort of refocuses themselves on the fact that the exemplary person cherishes above all their ethical character and the cultivation of virtue. Now, what happens if we find ourselves in unfamiliar territory, in a strange and foreign land, among the tribes? Well, how do we act appropriately then? I think many people may have to live overseas, for work or study. This often means living in a different culture, with different language, etiquette, customs, etc. So what do we do? Well, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. We should accord with the foreign local customs where we are. It's part of being respectful. But that doesn't stop us from upholding our ethical principles. In fact, in the Analects, Confucius said, speak with loyalty and good faith, act with dedication and deference. And even among the tribes, your conduct will be irreproachable. But if you speak without loyalty and good faith, if you act without dedication or deference, your conduct will be unacceptable, even in your own village. So it sort of reminds us that really it doesn't matter where we are. What matters is that we accord with those ethical principles by, for example, being considered in our words and actions and being considerate of others. And that's sort of universally appreciated. Now, the exemplary person finds themselves in adverse circumstances. How do they act appropriately then? Well, it's not that the exemplary person will never encounter challenges or hardships, but it's really how they respond to them. To be brave and patient and working through those times. There's the account of Xu Heng, who's a renowned Confucian scholar of the 13th century. One time he was traveling as a refugee, traveling through Heyang area, and there was a severe heat wave. Everyone was extremely thirsty, dehydrated. And they came upon a pear tree growing by the side of the road. As soon as the people saw the pear tree, well, they helped themselves to the pears, while others ate the pears to quench their thirst. Xu Heng, he refrained from doing so. And when he was asked why he didn't take any of the pears, Xu Heng replied that the pears weren't his to take. Well, someone retorted that, well, in these chaotic times, this pear tree probably belongs to nobody at all. So why can't we take the pears? Well, Xu Heng replied that, well, the pears may not have a master, an owner, well, I can be the master of my mind. And by not taking a single pear, even under quite, difficult conditions, Xu Heng exemplified the integrity of the exemplary person. Now, it didn't seem to occur to anyone else, to stop and think, well, does this tree belong to someone? Do I have permission to, take some of the pears? But in the absence of satisfactory answers to those questions, Xu did what the exemplary person would do. He didn't eat the pears because they were clearly not his. He didn't know who they belonged to, but they didn't belong to him. And I think that we can appreciate what Xu Heng did all the more if we put ourselves in the position of the owner of the pear tree. Now, hardship and misfortune doesn't just refer to the natural or man-made disasters. A person can experience misfortune and hardship when the conflict arises in their interpersonal relations. And this is probably one of the hardest things we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. The people who seem to make life difficult for us. Now, a person might well wonder why someone is giving them a hard time. Well, if you think about it, no one is perfect, at least not all of the time. And I think that in our busy day-to-day lives, we can sometimes inadvertently, unintentionally caused offence, or we've been inconsiderate without even knowing. And it's during these times when we catches our interpersonal relations that we have to reflect on ourselves, and we can use this as an opportunity to grow and to do better. It's when we reflect that we can discover our shortcomings, our faults. So the bottom line is, literally, the exemplary person is always at ease. An exemplary person is able to maintain an equilibrium, maintain equanimity. They don't ask anything of others. They don't expect others to change or agree. Instead, they seek from within and ask themselves, I should be the proactive one in looking for the common ground, in looking for ways to better work with or get along with someone else, rather than expecting others to put up with me and my habits. So in this way, we can feel more at ease wherever we are and whatever our circumstances. So we just take a quick look again at the 4 scenarios. In a privileged position, we have to be responsible not to abuse those privileges and to use the resources that we have to try to make a positive difference to the community. When we're less privileged, there's nothing stopping us from working on our ethical character. That's what matters the most. When we're in foreign lands, unfamiliar territory, well, we respect and accord with others. And under adverse circumstances, we can still be at ease by upholding our ethical character. So we can trace a common theme running through the passages that we've covered. Mencius would remind us to tap our boundless innate potential for moral goodness by developing our sprouts of virtue, their humanity, rightness, propriety, and wisdom. Confucius would urge us to focus our attentions and concerns beyond ourselves. Instead of worrying about achieving a position or recognition, we should focus on whether we have what it takes, the upstanding character, the outstanding ability to deserve a position or recognition in the first place. Instead of worrying about others not understanding or knowing us, we should be concerned about whether we understand and appreciate others. And I suppose, regardless of our circumstances in life, there's nothing to stop us from cultivating the right attitude to achieve a flourishing and fulfilling life. Now, quickly talk about this recent book. It just came out last year. And it's interesting because Professor of Philosophy, Alexis McLeod from the University of Connecticut in the United States, he believes that there are important lessons from early Chinese thinking on mental illness, lessons that further develop the illness, its connection to agency and morality, and our methods of treatment. And he found that one of the important aims of a number of early Chinese texts was to help readers overcome difficult mental states, doubt, depression, anxiety, for examples, and to cultivate positive outlooks that contribute to overall human thriving. For example, he identifies 3 general techniques that I've listed here for treatment that are found in various early Chinese texts that would fit into a consideration of self-cultivation and how it might operate in the context of current day, therapeutic approaches. Now, whereas modern psychiatry looks at mental illness as a matter of individual disorder, the ancient Chinese scholars have long understood, long known to take a communal approach to mental health. And Confucians in particular have emphasized that being part of harmonious and virtuous communities is necessary for the development of healthy behaviors, attitudes, and emotions. It's interesting that Confucians, who writes, Confucians would likely have said of our own modern world that the alienation created by the self-centeredness required for modern economic and consumer culture plays a major role in driving mental illness. Du Weiming, a contemporary scholar of Confucianism, writes that according to the Confucian view, self-centeredness easily leads to a closed world, to a state of paralysis. And MacLeod notes that the kinds of community that promote self-centeredness, self-concern, ranging from seemingly innocuous concern with defining oneself by our individual consumer choices to the corrosive lack of empathy or care for our community, those communities are likely to inculcate in individual members behavioural and attitudinal traits that contribute to mental illness. I think that's quite insightful. Now, as we try to address the widespread issue and the seemingly increasing problem of mental illness, the classical Chinese texts, the early Chinese texts, offer much in the way of timeless perspectives and timely reminders for our mental health and well-being. Now, today we've just covered a handful of tips and advice from the Mencius, the Analects, and the practice of the Ming. I hope that you find them of some use, and thank you very much for your attention. Let me just stop the sharing so I can see the chat. We have some time now for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, or you can type your question into the chat box. And also, if you've thought of any questions for the previous presentation by my colleague, Catherine, we didn't have much. I was conscious of not running over time before. So, you're very welcome to contribute. Okay. Just looking at the time.
There is a question on the chat.
Okay, let's have a look. Thanks, Catherine. So Alex here, here's the question. How does Confucianism establish belief in oneself, in one's positive potential? Some people who are going through hardship and keep making mistakes, they feel like they can't get any better. How can we help them feel hope and positivity for themselves? Well, I take this as a question for the mental health and well-being, tools for mental health and well-being. How does Confucianism establish belief in oneself and one's positive potential? As I talked about before, in the text, Mencius, I think that springs to mind first for a lot of people. Mencius talks about our sprouts of virtue that each and every one of us is born with. According to Mencius, undeniable and as sure as water flows downwards. So if we remember that, that's incredibly, I think, empowering and positive. It sort of motivates us to accentuate the positive, like the song. Now, that's a key factor. I think that when there are a whole range of hardships, I can think of, could be academic, could be economic, financial, and I think it's making mistakes as the Chinese philosophers in the Chinese texts, they recognize that making mistakes is part and parcel of being a human being. But the greatest goodness is when we realize that we've made a mistake, and we change. We commit to trying again and not to repeat those mistakes. That's sort of enshrined in one of the 5 classics. So before the 4 books, which was sort of came to be in the Song dynasty in China, there was what's known as the 5 classics, and they were associated with Confucian scholarship, or the orthodox classical scholarship that was sort of sponsored and promoted by the traditional government in traditional imperial China. So that's enshrined in one of the 5 classics, and in particular the Documents classic, the classic of documents. And I think that when we recognize that, yes, it is, we make mistakes, we're only human. But when we turn to these Chinese texts, if the person is unable to read Chinese, many of the Chinese texts, certainly the ones that we study at the Academy, have already been translated. Just like if you remember from, I put up the translation of Master Yen, Spring and Autumn Annals of Master Yen before. And I think they offer hope. We can understand and really come to grips with, because we're talking about these sorts of things, and I'm conscious that, I wish I had known about them a lot earlier. It seems that there doesn't seem to be a class, well, unless you study Sinology, where we can think about this and discuss and learn about these tools, the thinking of these great philosophers, and really taking the approach of, well, how can that, as opposed to a purely academic exercise, but coming to these ancient texts afresh, how can they inform, standing on the shoulders of giants? How can the words from those pages help me and benefit me in the decisions that I have to make in my career, in my relationships with the people around me? And I think that fills me. That can fill someone with incredible hope. They have a resource. They're not, caught between, a rock and a hard place. There's a resource there, and you can stand on the shoulders of giants, and you're just bound to see further. So I think that's one way of hope, renewing hope and positivity. And that's something that has worked for me in the past and continues to be the case. And I highly recommend that approach. When you can't feel down, and there is something that you can possibly do. And the idea with Mencius and the sprouts, as I said before, it puts you in the driver's seat. Once you realize that you have these sprouts, well, you want to be the one with the watering can. How can I work on my sprouts? How can I be a better human being and live this flourishing, happy life? It's not a matter of, what I'm studying, what my job can be. Well, I can be a better person in all of my relationships, whether I'm a son or a daughter, whether I'm a parent, a colleague, etc. So I think that's incredibly empowering, and that helps me to accentuate the positive. Thank you very much for your question, Alex. Does anyone else? Okay. There, okay, just scrolling up in the chat. Elliot has written, Dr. Maylee Pinto has also written quite extensively. Yes, I was just, it's really interesting. I was, amazed to stumble upon the Tao of Madness, this book published by Oxford University Press in 2021. But there's a whole corpus of research out there about Confucian mental health for social workers, the psychology, psychotherapy aspects. It's amazing. And certainly for anyone who's interested, thank you very much. Alex, that's very kind. Is there any more questions? We have a couple of minutes left. And again, if you have any questions for Catherine, you're more than welcome. Okay, well, that's fine. I think what's coming up is the break. I'll just double check the schedule. So how about we can have a bit of an early mark and take our 10-minute break now. So we'll break for 10 minutes, enjoy your break, and look forward to seeing you in 10 minutes' time. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you in a bit. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the final part of our second session. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce two students from the Academy of Sinology. First student is Nancy Wang, and she's a student of the Bachelor program. Nancy will be talking to us. She'll be presenting on family instruction. The other student is Xinghui Fuk, and she's one of the completing her master's. And Xinghui will be talking about her reflections on her study at the Academy. Now, they will each talk for about 25 minutes, followed by questions at the end. I'd first like to invite Nancy to take the floor. So Nancy, whenever you're ready. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy, and I'm currently a first-year bachelor student at the Academy of Sinology. Today, I will be sharing about my experience growing up with traditional Chinese culture integrated in my family education. I will share how my parents taught me through their actions. Before I begin my main topic, I'd like to give a bit of background on how and when my family first began learning traditional Chinese culture. My father first heard of the Venerable Master Qin Kong during his time at university. He spent great amounts of time listening to cassette tapes of Venerable Master Qin Kong's Dharma talks, as well as reading classics and sutras. He then introduced traditional Chinese culture to my mother, and when my mother was pregnant with me, she read the Heart Sutra to me. And this is what we call prenatal education in traditional Chinese culture. And that's how I was introduced to Chinese culture. I was born in China, but raised in Canada, and attended various public and independent schools. Throughout the years, my parents have continued to listen to Venerable Master Qin Kong's Dharma talks and kept up with teaching me traditional Chinese culture. Today, when we talk about education, we often think of elementary school, middle school, high school, and after that, university. And for some people, after an undergraduate degree, they then pursue a master's degree or even a PhD. However, Chinese sages tell us that there's more to it than academic education. The Venerable Master Qin Kong said that before academic education comes family education. He said family education is the root of all education. It is the root of world harmony and the foundation of peace in society. The Venerable Master Qin Kong put such emphasis on family education because a child's growth in childhood is the most important in their life. What a child is taught in his or her childhood will determine the rest of their life. There's a saying in Chinese that goes, 3岁看8时, which roughly means when a child is at the age of 3, one is able to see what his future will hold. We learn many important things in our childhood, and our parents play the most important role of all, to lead by example and teach us how to be a good person. Today, I will first share my experience of family education in 3 sections: the importance of good environment, learning to read classics and do things, and learning how to interact with others through my parents' demonstration in their relationships. Then I will talk about how I have benefited from my family education. To begin, in a story, we know that we're always introduced with the setting. The setting determines a lot for a story. Same with the environment for a child's education. A good environment with good influences makes a significant difference for a child's growth. Here, I'd like to share a Chinese story. 2,000 years ago in China, there lived a young boy with his mother. They were very poor and first lived near a graveyard, where mourners often came to mourn and weep for loved ones who had passed on. After some time, the young boy began to imitate this behavior. The children played games copying the activities of the funerals and rituals. Upon discovering this, his mother knew that this was unacceptable and moved to find a better environment to raise her son. They found a place in the town. The streets in the town bustled with merchants and vendors and the activities of a nearby slaughterhouse. Here, the young boy, like other children in the new neighborhood, copied the behavior of the merchants and butchers, playing games of pretending to cut meat. Again, his mother found this to be unacceptable and moved once more, this time settling near a school. At their new home, the young boy, in an environment of people studying and reading, surrounded by saints and sages' teachings, began to imitate their polite behavior and became studious himself. Many may be familiar with the story. It's a true story, and the young boy later became a great sage, Mencius. From this story, we see the amount of influence an environment can have on a child. My own parents also took great care in choosing the right environment to raise my sister and myself. They chose a farm in the quiet countryside, away from the business of cities. On the farm, I had the opportunity to be surrounded by nature and often played outside in the fields, in the forest, or by the creek, which is also better for physical health. There was also the chance to help out with farm work, where I can get a taste of the difficulties of providing for the family and learn to work with others. But my parents also never put pressure on me. They never forced me to learn anything or do anything. They never told me to achieve a certain academic degree or said that I should pursue a certain career. My parents only ever told me to not be a burden to society or the people around me, and if I had the ability, to try to do good things for the world. Now, when I was young, my parents taught me how to read classics. I was around 3 years old when my father taught me, and he was always very patient. When we started, we began with a little bit at a time, maybe 10 or 20 minutes at first, and he never expected too much of me, especially when I was young. And we always read together. He always was there beside me. Some of the classics that I've read over the years include 弟子规, which is known as the guidelines for being a good person, 三字经, known as the three-character classic, and 太上感应篇, the treatise of the most exalted one on cause and effect, and other children's classics. Until I was older, I don't think we ever sat down for more than 30 to 40 minutes at a time to read or learn classics. And as I got a little older, my father also taught me how to write Chinese characters. He let me practice my writing by copying Chinese classics. Apart from learning and reading classics, my parents spent a lot of time with me and my sister, teaching us how to do chores and also playing together. We never had a TV at home, So my dad taught me how to play Chinese chess and a Chinese board game called 5 in a Row. Other times, we would read Chinese stories or make little crafts together, or we played sports and games outside. In the winter time, when it snowed, we would have snowball fights or build snowmen. In the summertime, when we were busy with farm work, we would all go together to work in the fields. Not all of my time was spent studying. In fact, I would say most of the time I wasn't. And I believe it's the time spent together as a family that makes up an important part of my growth. Another aspect that I noticed my parents did was teaching according to the child. It wasn't just all the same for my sister and me. For example, I'm often very slow at doing things. I'll procrastinate and do things very carefully, taking up a lot of time, doing things last minute. My parents will often say to me, "You don't need to be overly meticulous," or "You can go a little faster." But my sister is the opposite of me. She likes to get things done quickly, and sometimes her work is a little sloppy. So my parents will tell her to slow down and put a little more care into her work. Another thing about me is that I don't really like to exercise all that much. But my dad would always encourage me to go outside and exercise every day because he knew the importance of physical health. Again, my sister is rather the opposite of me. She likes to go outdoors and play sports, sometimes not wanting to do her homework. My dad would then encourage her to ensure her homework is done, but he never forced us. Every parent wants their child or children to be happy. I believe that my parents not only imparted the teachings of Chinese classics, they also gave me a healthy and happy childhood. The 5 relationships in Confucianism are between parent and child, husband and wife, leader and followers, elder and younger siblings, and friends. I've seen my parents demonstrate each of these relationships in their interactions. Actions speak louder than words. We've all heard of that. Through their actions, my parents have taught me more about how to interact with others than I ever could learn through reading or listening to any lectures. For the parent and child relationship, I see my parents put into practice family reverence toward my grandparents. For the husband and wife relationship, my parents have different roles in the family. For example, my mom is responsible for cooking, whereas my dad does more work on the farm. And I've really seen them argue, which brings harmony to the family. For the leader and follower, or subordinate relationship, I've seen how my parents treat the farm workers in the summer with generosity and kindness. And through this, I have learned how leaders and subordinates can interact harmoniously, which would be useful in my future. With their siblings, my parents are very respectful to their elder sisters, and seeing their relationships has set an example for myself for interacting with my own younger sister. And by seeing my parents get along with their friends and helping out when they can, I have learned the way to interact with my friends. All of these, though some may seem like small things, are examples for me, and these good actions teach me how to interact with the people around me. Parents are the role models for their children. Now I'll be sharing some of the things that I have learned from my family education. 2 of the most important things that my parents taught me through their actions are 1, treating people with kindness and respect. As I mentioned earlier, my parents show their generosity and kindness to all those around them. For example, in the summer, my parents often send my sister and me to bring vegetables to all of our neighbors as a kind gesture and it doesn't matter if they know them well or not. And because of this generosity, my parents get along well with all of our neighbors. This has taught me to be kind and respectful to everyone. The other thing is hardworking and being independent. Running a farm, my parents have worked hard, and their actions have taught me that hard work leads to fruits of labor. They are often the first to go to work in the fields in the mornings and the last to come home in the evenings, letting the hired workers rest first. When they can do something on their own, they wouldn't ask others to do it for them. My parents often patiently guided me through things I needed help with, but also gave me space to figure out on my own and let me grow. I'd like to share a story about this. A few years ago, my parents bought an IKEA wardrobe. They were busy with farm work, and I thought it would be a fun task to try to assemble it. So I asked if I could do it. I know at this point some parents would think, but that's dangerous for a child to do, or how could a child be able to assemble something like that properly? It might fall apart. It's true, I did need some help, but when my dad heard my request, he agreed to it, and excitedly, I started working on it right away. It took me all morning and all afternoon, and halfway through, I needed help. But by dinner time, the wardrobe was more or less put together, albeit a little wobbly and had many screws in need of tightening. But my dad came and patiently helped to tighten all the screws and finish up the work. You might be wondering at this point, couldn't he have just done it himself in less than half the time? Couldn't he have done a better job of it without resulting in a wobbly wardrobe? Of course he could have. But he gave me the chance to work on it on my own because during the process, I learned how to be independent and solve the problems that arose. In the end, I felt accomplished, and it gave me confidence that I could do something on my own. Another example is that my dad started teaching me how to drive the tractor by the age of 13. And he let me drive as soon as I was old enough. As a child, it was a lot of fun to drive the tractor, but my parents were also teaching me to do my part in contributing to the family. And when I was able to drive on my own, he let me make deliveries by myself. On my deliveries, the people I meet often express their surprise at the fact that my dad will let his 18-year-old daughter do such hard work. It might be difficult for some parents to understand, but I know my parents let me do it to help me learn. And I had never thought of it as tiring or hard, but as a duty, because my parents had always taught me this over the years. In fact, I enjoyed doing it. And I learned so many real-world things while driving and doing deliveries that I could not ever have possibly learned from reading books. Most importantly, I learned how to interact and communicate with people in all kinds of situations, including when someone is upset at me or when I've made a mistake and have had to apologize. These are all real-world situations and problems that I've come across and have had to learn to solve on my own. I'm glad that my parents gave me this opportunity, and I believe that letting me do things on my own, although it may not be the most convenient for them, has helped me grow. I am immensely grateful to have such amazing parents who have put so much effort into raising me and my sister, and for setting such a great example. Thank you, Mom and Dad. And thank you everyone for listening. Now, please welcome my fellow student, Xinghui, to share with you her reflections and thoughts on learning Sinology. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jiahui. Hello, everyone. My name is Xinghui Fuk, and I'm currently a master's student at the Academy of Sinology, UWTSD. This is my 4th year here, and today I'm going to share about my reflection and the benefits gained from learning traditional Chinese culture. This is the content of my presentation. I'll first introduce how I started learning traditional Chinese culture. Then I will share the benefits I've gained from learning, and finally, the methods of learning. First, on how I started learning traditional Chinese culture. I was first exposed to it as a child. Every week, my mother would send my brother and me to Chinese classics classes for children. As we were growing up, my mother continually immersed herself in the teachings of Venerable Master Qing Kong and Venerable Cheng De, who was then Teacher Cai. As she played these Dharma talks and lectures at home, the seeds of these teachings were imperceptibly sown in our minds. When we faced problems in school, my mother would also use these teachings to guide us. And each time, there would be positive outcomes. These incidents strengthened my faith in traditional Chinese culture. Apart from this, my parents would also educate us through their actions. The filial respect and love they show to my grandparents and the way they love and care for my aunts and uncles have unknowingly shaped my values and taught me that this is the way we should treat our family. During the process of learning traditional Chinese culture, I was moved by these two teachings. Those who are hateful must have a pitiful circumstance, and people are innately good. After learning about the life stories of those deemed hateful, these two teachings have time after time proven to be true. I always wondered how people develop into hateful people and how we can prevent that from happening. This prompted me to study psychology for my first degree, to understand the factors that influence a person's thought and behavior. Such understanding has helped me be more empathetic towards others' circumstances instead of being too quick to blame. For example, during my internship working with youth offenders, I learned that they often came from broken families and do not have an adult to constantly provide them with care and guidance. With such an understanding, what can we do to improve these circumstances? Venerable Master Qing Kong repeatedly emphasizes this from the Book of Rites, Li Ji. To build up a country and govern its people, education is the first priority. 建国军民，教学为先. Only through learning would individuals know how to cultivate and conduct themselves. Also, as mentioned in the Book of Rites, through self-cultivation, families can be regulated, countries can be well governed, and subsequently, the whole world can achieve stability. 身修而后家齐，家齐而后国治，国治而后天下平. Therefore, to resolve problems from their roots, to be instilled with the proper mindset for self-cultivation, education is the crucial first step. The ancient sages have offered solutions to these issues in the classics. Since I was fortunate to be exposed to the wisdom of the ancient sages, I believe I have the responsibility to delve into these teachings to offer them to the world. With the constant encouragement and support from my teachers, family, and friends, I came to the Academy of Sinology, UWTSD, to further my learning in traditional Chinese culture. Next, on the benefits from learning. It has been almost 4 years since I came to the Academy. Though I'm still lacking very much in my learning, I will next share some benefits gained from my limited learning. It is hoped that it offers some perspectives on how traditional Chinese culture could provide practical benefits to our everyday lives. I will begin by sharing how learning has improved my personal well-being. In my many years of schooling, I was not the student who found enjoyment in learning. I studied because it was my responsibility to do so, and worked for acceptable grades to enter university and get a job. Some subjects were interesting to learn, but sometimes I find that there is still a gap between learning and application to our daily lives. Learning Sinology at the academy felt quite different. I remember for our first module, where we learned daily manners, the essentials of courtesy, I remarked to my friend after class one day, "Wow, how fortunate we are. We are learning practical knowledge that we can apply to our daily lives." When teaching us, our teachers stress the importance of putting learning into practice. For example, the first teaching of the essentials of courtesy reads, "A good child should get up early and tidy up clothes and bedding by themselves. Be sure to greet our parents in the morning and see that they are secure in the evening." This sounds like a simple rule that is taught to children, but in fact, there is an important rationale behind it. If we form the habits of treasuring our time, keeping our environment in good order, and making sure our parents are well, it develops self-discipline and helps us keep our parents in mind. Practicing this teaching brings me joy and assurance, knowing that I have more time to do what I needed to, seeing that the environment is neat and tidy, and that my parents are well. Confucius said in the opening chapter of the Analects, "Isn't it a pleasure to learn and constantly practice what is learned? 学而时习之，不亦说乎?" This is just one example of how constantly putting what we learn into practice can be fulfilling. These rewards bring us inner joy that cannot be achieved by external rewards. This is the first kind of joy I gained from learning. The second kind of joy is with regards to my life goals and pursuits. In the past, my goals were more centered around myself and my own family. To repay my parents' love, my goal was to earn enough money to allow my family to enjoy life without having to worry about material needs. For myself, it was similar. I did not have enough concern or a strong sense of mission to do my part for the community and society. I wanted to find a meaningful job in which I could help others, and in my own time, I'll find ways to enjoy the pleasures of life. So, as we can see, my goals are more centered around myself and my family. However, after learning Sinology, I realized that there is so much more that we can do for ourselves and others. One of the most outstanding students of Confucius, Zhengzi, said, "A scholar cannot but aim high and be perseverant, for he has to shoulder heavy responsibilities and has a long way ahead. He takes benevolence as his responsibility. Is that not heavy? Only with death does the road come to an end. Is that not long? 事不可以不弘毅，任重而道远。人以为己任，不亦重乎？死而后已，不亦远乎?" For a benevolent person, while striving to gain footing, will help others gain theirs. While striving to seek accomplishment, would help others gain theirs. 己欲立而立人，己欲达而达人. I am fortunate to have the opportunity to learn the teachings of the ancient sages, and in them lie the teachings for a fulfilling life, a harmonious family, and a peaceful society. Thus, to only seek my own happiness is too self-centered. While looking to lead a happy and fulfilling life, I should also help others build theirs. I now have a greater life goal to work towards something greater than myself. Recently, I had the opportunity to conduct English classes for young children. It could be seen that as they learn the teachings of the ancient sages, their inherent good nature is retained and further developed. The natural love they show to their parents and the kindness they extend towards others and the environment are role models for us. If we could help people retain and further develop their innate good nature through education, that would be a very meaningful and fulfilling job. Not only would the child grow up to be a happy, kind, and healthy person, happy families will be built too. When we can help others realize their potential and bring joy and meaning to their lives, that is much more meaningful and rewarding than seeking our own pleasure. This, I believe, is also a better way of repaying our parents, teachers, and those who love us by extending their love to benefit more people. Learning to devote myself to a greater cause, working towards something greater than myself, is the second joy I've gained through the learning of Sinology. The third kind of joy I've experienced is by learning to choose my thoughts. Buddhism teaches us that all phenomena are manifested by the mind. 一切法从心想生. How a situation affects us is not determined by the situation itself, but by what we make out of it. Venerable Master Chin Kung taught us to live in a grateful world. Be grateful to those who have criticized you, for they have increased your wisdom and concentration. Be grateful to those who have made you stumble, for they have strengthened your ability. Be grateful to those who have abandoned you, for they have taught you to be independent. Be grateful to those who have hit you, for they have reduced your karmic obstacles. Be grateful to those who have deceived you, for they have deepened your insight. Be grateful to those who have hurt or harmed you, for they have reinforced your determination. Be grateful to those who have made you firm and resolute and helped in your achievement. In situations in which we have been criticized, abandoned, or deceived, there are still things to be grateful for. Those who criticize us have increased our wisdom and concentration. Those who have abandoned us taught us to be independent. And those who have deceived us have deepened our insight. When we meet difficult circumstances, if we choose to focus on the positive aspects and make the most out of the situation, we could grow and benefit from even the worst predicament. Recently, I got ill and had to receive treatment lasting several months. In the beginning, the treatment didn't go smoothly as I experienced side effects which made me even more sick, putting my health in danger. I got worried and wondered, why is this happening to me? Did I do something wrong? The law of cause and effect tells us that whatever we encounter is a result of our own deeds. Buddhism also teaches us that all phenomena are manifested by the mind. What is something I'm not doing right that resulted in this? My teacher very kindly told me my shortcomings and to correct myself from my thoughts. During the process, I also used the situation as a motivation to correct my shortcomings and mend my bad habits. With the constant encouragement and care from my family, teachers, and friends, I learned to face the situation more positively and turned to use the situation as a stimulus to improve myself. Sometimes we cannot change external circumstances, but we do not have to let that dictate us. We have the choice to choose our thoughts, how we let the situation affect us, and positive outcomes could result from a seemingly bad situation. Learning to choose our thoughts gives us freedom in every situation. This is the third joy I've experienced through learning. Other than the joy from learning, the improvement in interpersonal relationships is another practical benefit of learning Sinology. As Zhu mentioned, no one in the world falls outside the constant relationships. Therefore, no learning falls outside this category. 天下无伦外之人，故自无伦外之学. In other words, the purpose of learning is no other than to better fulfill our responsibilities in the 5 constant relationships. In the 5 constant relationships, there should be a distinction between husband and wife, love between father and son, precedence of the old over the young, duty between leader and subordinate, and trustworthiness between friends. The purpose of learning is not just to gain expertise in an area, but more importantly, to better fulfill our responsibilities and improve interpersonal relationships. Within these 5 constant relationships, the most fundamental one is the love between parent and child. When we are born, a natural bond exists between parent and child. The purpose of education is to maintain this natural bond for the rest of one's life and further extend this love for one's parents to siblings, family, friends, and all people. To know if we are getting closer to the goal of education, our relationship with our parents is a good indicator. Through learning Sinology, I was better able to appreciate my parents and put myself in their shoes to feel what they feel. Since I left home to come to the UK, my father would send me stickers on WeChat every day to say good morning and good night. He would also ask me about the weather and whether I was well. In the beginning, I did not see my father's intention behind these stickers and hence did not appreciate them enough. I would reply with similar stickers without much thought and sometimes didn't reply at all. However, as I learned to put myself in my father's shoes and let go of my own assumptions, I came to realize the deeper meaning behind these stickers. They carry the deep love and concern a parent has for the child who is far away. Seeing our reply, they will know that we are well, and that gives them assurance. Realizing this, I appreciated these stickers more and put more thought into replying them. I can better feel my father's deep love, which made me more grateful, and that brought me closer to my father. Letting go of our own thoughts and feelings to fully stand in the shoes of others is an important part of interpersonal relationships and to get along with others. When we can truly spend every thought thinking for others, there would hardly be anyone we cannot get along with. I'm not doing this very well, but I yearn to start by learning to empathize with my parents. Finally, on the methods of learning. Reflecting on the benefits gained from learning, I am very grateful for the opportunity to learn at the Academy of Sinology. When we are just starting to learn, the learning environment is of great importance. In the Academy, we have more time to be immersed in the teachings of the ancient sages, which is vital for these teachings to be instilled in us. We spend our class time learning classics, which gives us time to delve into the teachings of the sages. Other than that, We also have extracurricular classes that focus on the application of these teachings to consolidate our learning. Since the moral education lessons are attended by everyone in the academy, it helps to build harmony by having the same viewpoints and in observing the same precepts. When working on tasks together, such as helping out in the kitchen or being in charge of a certain project, we'll try our best to adhere to the teachings of the sages and to remind each other about that too. The presence of teachers and friends is pivotal too. Teachers provide a model for us to emulate by practicing what they teach, and that shows us the way to conduct ourselves and deal with matters. Friends learn alongside us, and their examples also help us put into practice the teachings of the ancient sages. We have been strongly encouraged to practice giving lectures following the lectures given by teachers. This is to enhance our understanding of the teachings and to make ourselves more familiar with how our parents, our teachers think. It is said that when we admire the virtuous, we should admire their heart and mind. 目贤当慕其心. Thus, to emulate our teachers, it is important to first be familiar with their heart and mind, and lecturing practice helps us achieve that. The guidelines for being a good person teaches us to be close to kind and virtuous people. The environment in the academy provides us ample opportunities to do so, to immerse ourselves in the teachings of the ancient sages, in learning and in our daily lives. Such immersive learning has helped me better integrate the teachings of the ancient sages into my everyday life. All in all, I'm very grateful to be able to experience the joys of learning. This is the joy from putting learning into practice, from working towards something that is greater than myself, and to learn to choose my thoughts in different situations. I thank my mother for strengthening my faith in traditional Chinese culture since young, my teachers and friends for showing me the way. Although I'm inadequate as a student of the sages, I strive to continue learning from them to better fulfill my responsibilities, to help others gain footing while I strive to gain mine, and help others seek accomplishment when I strive to seek mine. This is all for my presentation today. Any feedback and suggestions would be appreciated. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much to Nancy and Xinghui for sharing their personal reflections. Now, as before, if you have a question, we have some time. Please feel free to raise your hand or type your question into the chat box. I've already received a question each for Nancy and Xinghui. So Nancy first, I'll read out the question. I think you mentioned that your parents took care in choosing a school for you. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? What kind of school did they choose?
Thank you, Kelly. As for choosing schools, at the beginning, my parents sent me to just a regular public school. But as a couple of years passed, they saw the influence going to a public school had on me. I was catching some of the bad habits, and they decided that it would be best if they could find a better school for me, just like the story of Mencius. So at first, they homeschooled me for a year or so, and then they found a Christian school where the learning environment, or say the environment is more traditional, and you know, people are respectful towards each other. So I ended up going to Christian schools for yes, part of my schooling. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. The question that I had for Xing Hui is, in your opinion, what are the most important factors in one's learning of traditional Chinese culture? When you're ready, Xing Hui. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. I think just as what has been shared today, the learning environment is especially important for the learning of everything, actually. Like Nancy's sharing of the story of Menxia's mother who moved 3 times. So the learning environment is especially important. And this environment includes the family education, and also the school that a child is in. Yeah, and this contributes to the environments for learning. And from my experience, I have benefited greatly from the good environment that I have been in. So from my family, because of my mother's being able to immerse herself in the teachings of the Venerable Master Chin Kung and teachers, so she was able to create an environment that was conducive for learning and use these teachings to guide us. So, and also the teaching by example by my family, I could also experience how these teachings, when put into practice, the positive outcomes they bring. And also, on the other hand, is the school environment. So the Academy of Sinology allows us the conditions to immerse ourselves also in the teachings. And I think because Venerable Master Chin Kung has taught us that it is important to delve into a subject of study for a long time and immerse ourselves in it, and to be able to learn thoroughly. So I think the environment is a very important factor for learning. And also because like what I've shared, all phenomena is a manifestation by the mind. So I think with this environment, it helps a child, a person, to cultivate interest in learning. And this interest is the most important to help motivate and drive one in their learning. So the self and the environment are the important factors for learning. Thank you, Kelly.
Absolutely. I think we couldn't agree more. Now, given the time, thank you very much for all of the questions we've received today, for everyone's kind attention. Now, please join me in inviting a Provost of the Academy of Sinology, Venerable Shen Miao, to provide the closing remarks for this session. Thank you very much, Venerable Shen Miao.
Thank you, Kelly. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and students, we are honored that you have joined us for the first day of the Academy's Sinology Art of Living seminars. When Venerable Master Chin Kung and Vice Chancellor Professor Madeleine Hughes came together in establishing the Academy in 2016. The vision was to improve lives through the wisdom of the Chinese heritage traditions. The mission of the Academy is to nurture young minds in learning, advancing, and sharing the words and examples of ancient thinkers and ancient texts for life today. Solutions to many of the common problems we face within the family, at work, and in the community can be found in the ancient text of Sinology. The challenges we face at the government and the global level can also benefit from the experience and lessons of the past. As the title of the ancient classic of changes, 易经, tells us, the world is ever changing, but there are underlying principles that remain constant and timeless. Although they can be profound truths at one level, they also are simple to understand. Just like how technology advances, but the laws of physics remain constant. Interpersonal relations in person and online are much more diverse today, but friends and family remain treasured. People often say that they are surprised that this text recording the thought of Confucius and other philosophers could be so relevant and understandable. And they tell us that they wish they could have heard about the ideas earlier. To be sure, there is a highly specialized study and research involved in interpreting and translating the ancient text, and that forms the main work of the Academy. But the fruit of our labor should be shared in a way that is accessible to people from all walks of life. If you have found even one idea or one strategy to be useful, then we have succeeded in our aim. But if it has been too abstract or academic, then we welcome your feedback and will keep improving. The vision of the Academy is also to reach out internationally. Venerable Masters work towards multicultural and multi-faith harmony spanning many decades had confirmed to him the many resonances that Chinese thought traditions have with the cultural traditions around the world. The goodness of humanity and the limitless great potential inside all of us that Mencius discussed was also a realization of other sages. Regardless of where they come from, the aspiration to better the human condition, alleviate suffering, and promote harmony is what brings us together. We hope that there will be more cross-cultural dialogue and collaboration. To this end, there are two very exciting projects in the pipeline that I would like to share with you. First, there will be a new bachelor program that is taught in English. to provide learning opportunities in sinology for those who are not familiar with Chinese or classical Chinese. The Academy plans to launch a new bachelor program next year that is taught in English. This aims to further promote sinology cross-culturally. Although it remains subject to validation, we'll discuss the subject of this new bachelor's degree in tomorrow's session. Second, we'll offer online course in Chinese. We understand that those who can come to the Academy are very much in the minority. In order to accommodate those who are interested in studying with us, but cannot make it here, the Academy will establish an open online academy in the second half of this year. We aim to commence teaching next year. The courses offered through the online institute will be free of charge. Those who finish the program will receive a certificate of completion. We hope to study and practice the ancient teachings with those who share the same aspirations. Finally, the Academy not only seeks to make this learning accessible and provide global reach, but also to bring into focus the practical aspect of sinology. Learning and its application are not distinct. Like when our eyes see where to go, our legs will make the move. This learning does not just happen when we read the text or listen to lectures, but it happens in our day-to-day experiences. I thank you again for your support. I hope our sessions have offered you food for thought and inspiration to perfect your art of living. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Thank you very much indeed, Venerable Shen Miao, for your very kind words. Now, this is the first day of the Academy's Sinology Art of Living seminars. Now, tomorrow we look forward, as Venerable Shen Miao said, we look forward to presenting on the new subjects to be taught in English that are being planned at the Academy. And our session, which is the third and final session, begins tomorrow at 8:30 UK time or 3:30 Beijing time. We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.